Hi everyone, I am Anand Sitaram, an assistant professor in the computer science department at the State University of New York, Binghamton. In this video, I wanted to talk to you about how to write a research paper. Now, if you're a graduate student in computer science, regardless of the field that you work in, you will be submitting research papers to conferences and journals. Now, depending on your research area and the appropriateness of the work that you have done, you would submit it to the conference or a journal that you would like. Now, there are different areas in computer science. For example, computer networks, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, and depending on the area that you work in, the length of your paper is going to vary. Now, the format that you would use to write your paper would also vary depending on the area. For example, the paper that we have in front of us is written in the ACM format. This is a paper that my students and I and my collaborator wrote and submitted to BuildSys 2019, which is a top conference in the area of energy systems, and it was accepted and presented at that conference. So, what I would do today is go through and help you understand how you can write your research paper. Now, this particular paper is formatted in the ACM style. Depending on your research area, as I mentioned, you might use some other style, for example, the IEEE style or the AAAI style, and there are other styles as well. But regardless of your style or your research area, all papers have some things that are common. And what I would like to convey in this video are the things that you would need to write a research paper on your own. Now, the first thing that you would notice here is that the paper has an abstract. An abstract is usually something in the order of 150 to 250 words, and it succinctly captures the main contributions of the paper. So that's what an abstract is. Now, the abstract comes in the beginning of the paper, but when you are trying to write your research paper, your abstract is something that you will write last. This is because you only know your abstract once you have written your entire paper and you are completely sure and confident of all the results. Now, the next section of your paper, which is important, is the introduction. Now, the introduction is the portion where you introduce your contributions of your paper. Now, we'll go through the different sections, then I'll tell you how you can actually write different paragraphs of the introduction. Now, after the introduction, what you usually have is a section called the related work. Now, till this portion, all papers follow a specific format. Now, from the next section, the format of the paper or the style of the paper can change depending on what kind of problem that you are tackling. Now, in a generic setting, what you would do is you would first introduce the problem that you are working on. Now, in this paper, the problem that we were working on was also associated with some real world data that we had collected from buildings on our campus. So, this section, we titled it as Problem Statement and Data. There are a bunch of other different kinds of papers where you would first write your problem statement along with your assumptions and the model that you are going to consider. So those are the things that go in this section. Now, after you have described the problem that you are planning to work on, what you tend to do is you then describe the solution, which in this case is our system swap that we design. Okay, so this is the usual structure. So first you describe your problem, then you present your solution. Now, once you have presented your solution, which would go in like a few pages, the final important section would be usually something called performance evaluation. It can also be titled results. Sometimes, if you do simulation work, it's titled simulation results. It is basically where you present the results of your work. Now, once you've presented your results, which usually go on for a few pages, what you finally do is you conclude your paper with conclusion here and an outlook towards future work. So this is the general structure of a paper. So what did we do? Let's go back. We first had an abstract, which I told you is usually written after your paper is complete. So the first section is essentially your introduction. Then you have a section on related work when you compare and contrast your current research with other research that is out there. The third section is usually the problem statement and describes your assumptions and what kind of problem you're working on. Then you present your solution or algorithm that you are designing. It could also be the system. And finally, you present your results that demonstrate the superior performance of your system or algorithm or your approach in general. Finally, you conclude the paper with a conclusion and with an outlook of future results. One thing that I forgot to mention so far is something called references. So this is your reference section. So at the end of your paper, you would have all the references that you've cited for doing this research and which are related to your work. Okay. So now how do you go about writing this paper? Okay. So every paper is different because it tells a different story, but I'm going to give you some high level tips. So let's start with the introduction. Say you have found a problem and you have come up with an algorithm to actually solve that problem that you have. So that's where any research starts. You find a problem, do some reading of related work, see how it's different from the work that is out there, how it advances the current research. Then you come up with a solution that you propose, and you have some results. And so once you get to this state that you've found a problem, identified a gap in existing work, come up with a new solution, and then gotten some initial results, you can start writing your paper. Now, one of the hardest sections to write in a paper is your introduction. Why is that the hardest? Because when you submit your paper to a conference or a journal, reviewers are going to review your paper and they are going to decide whether your work is meritorious enough to actually publish in this particular conference or journal. So you want to attract the reviewers and make them interested in your research. To do that, the abstract is a portion where you highlight all your contributions. And once the reviewers have read your abstract, they're going to read your introduction. So in the introduction, the first paragraph, the first two paragraphs, or the first paragraph at least of your research is your motivation. You have to motivate why your problem is interesting and why somebody should be interested in this research and why it is important. For example, in this paper, we were talking about designing models for water consumption prediction. And as you can see, we have presented some data showing why this is an important problem to study. Okay. Now, sometimes it's not just done in one paragraph. It can go over, you can take a couple of paragraphs to actually motivate your work. There is no hard and fast rule, but that's what you do. Then what you have to do is then in the in the paragraph that follows, in this case our second paragraph in this paper, is you design what is the problem and why you want to solve it. And how. This is an overview of your research. Okay? Now, the subsequent paragraphs of your introduction actually will highlight your contributions. That's what we have done in this paragraph here and in this paragraph. And the final paragraph is kind of wrapping up what is the overall contribution of your work, overall contribution. So that is a general outline how to present your research. Now, this is, I would like to say that this is not the only way to write a paper. Sometimes you would like to itemize your contributions so that it's very clear to the reviewers what your actual contributions are and how they advance the state of the art. But there are different styles. I just mentioned what you should try to do when you're writing your paper. This would be the first draft of your paper, and then you can improve upon it as you go along. Now, in the related works section, you would, depending on how much space you have and what's the length of the paper, you have to cite the relevant research, and you write a couple of paragraphs or more on what is the related work and how you differ. So that's what this section does. What is the related work, and more importantly, how you differ. That's what you should try to do in this section. Now, uh, in our in this paper, we first described the problem that we studied. In the next section, the thing that you can notice here is I've clearly highlighted a subsection called problem statement. So this will draw the attention of the reviewer to something that is important, or basically what is the problem. And in the earlier parts of this paper, we had defined the problem loosely in layman's terms in the introduction, but you will see here that we have defined it much more precisely here. So this is precise definition. So, so this is your mathematical approach. Okay. So this is where you are concretely and precisely mathematically defining what your problem is. Okay. After this, in this particular paper, we also talk about what the data is in our work, and that is given a separate subsection. Now, when you're writing a paper which is based on data, uh, it or some data that you've collected using a system, what it might be a good idea to actually present some of the information of this data. So that's what these graphs provide overview of the data. So once again, if it is a system that you're designing and it's not based on data that you've collected, then you can use this to actually provide a high-level overview of the system, or what are the shortcomings of an existing system, highlight those gaps in this section. So that's what we do in these graphs, and that's what this table also does. Now, when you then go ahead and provide or show your contribution in this next section, which in this case is our smart water prediction framework in section 4. So one thing that you will see here is we draw this diagram. So diagrams are very important. It provides an overview of system, or what we are trying to achieve. That's what this our diagram is all about. It provides everybody what we are trying to do. Okay. Now you might have equations in your research as well, where you talk about how you go about designing your algorithm, or what are the intricacies of your system, and that's where you actually write a bunch of equations, right, like the one that we have done here. So you give all the details about all this in these sections. Okay. Now, once again, you can see that we have not done with all our pictures and describing our models. So we had a couple of models in this paper, so we drew these models here. So this kind of nice, good-looking pictures is what you would also want to put in your paper, so that it is very easy for the reviewer as well as the reader to understand what you are saying. So pictures speak louder than words. So this picture should also give you a good idea of what is your contribution, and it should help the reviewer understand what you're trying to do. So after you have done all that, you'll finally evaluate your system. So you'll come to performance evaluation. So what we have done here is we have compared our system with a bunch of baselines, and this is There's a common theme in general across a bunch of different papers. Once again, you can't have one set formula for all papers, but this is common theme. So you see here, these are our baselines, and we clearly mention what our baselines are in this work, and because that's what we are going to compare our system swap with. And then you have to present your results. Now, depending on your research, you can use different kinds of graphs or plots to actually illustrate your results, or you can use tables, and many times you will use a combination of both. So we have used these tables here, and those tables will highlight. Now, just to draw the attention of the reviewer and the reader to the performance gains of our system, you will see that we have highlighted our performance numbers in bold, so that it is clear that we are actually beating the baselines, because that helps the reviewer while they are reading this paper. Similarly, you will see that we have a bunch of figures. Now, one thing when you're plotting figures, let's concentrate on this figure out here. When you're drawing this figure, you will see that each and every line is distinct. It is clearly visible to the reader. There are different colors, you see, and the colors are distinct. We've used different styles. So play around with the formatting. So write a good script to actually generate these kind of figures. You can use your favorite plotting software, get it right so that all your figures look uniform and they actually look good. And once again, we have a few more tables, and that's essentially our graphs, and that's essentially our result. So what I mentioned here is not how you can write any research paper. Of course, there will be differences, but this gives you an outline. I would like to highlight one more final thing, and I would like to reiterate it. When you draw these graphs, your graphs should be readable when printed. So you can see that what we have done, the units are all there, like gallons. In here, we have actually clearly mentioned the y and x axes. We have mentioned the numbers. We have mentioned all these symbols, and they fit well into this. Okay, and all our figures have good captions, which makes it very easy to read. And we have separated all our results into different sections. So let's just go back to the performance evaluation. So here when we were doing the performance evaluation, we were using different kinds of metrics. For example, one of our metrics was RMSE. We don't need to know the metric. So you see, we actually had a separate section for that. Then for another of our results was MAE. Just MAE here, and you will see that we had a separate section for that. And then what we did would we also qualitatively validate our results. So we had a separate section for this one. And we then changed some of the parameters of our system to see how robust our system is, and that gave rise to these subsections. So whatever you're doing, would like to write it as separate subsections so that it is very clear to the reader what you are trying to do. Now, so this should give you a high-level overview of how to write a research paper. I would like to conclude with one final tip. For that, let's just go to some page here. So, for example, let's just pick this paragraph here. Okay. Now, when you write one paragraph, it should give what you are trying to say succinctly for that paragraph. You should not ramble on and on about what you are trying to say. It should be precise, and you should pack in numbers to justify your results. And a paragraph should not be too long or too short. It should be roughly of this size. It could be a little longer or a little shorter, but that's how you write paragraphs. So each paragraph kind of makes a single point, and only a single point. If you have multiple points that you would like to draw the attention of the reader to, it might be a good idea to use different paragraphs for those. So whenever you're writing, this is what you should focus on when you're writing your paper, that one paragraph talks about one point, the next paragraph talks about one point, and then there should be good continuing sentences or fillers between two paragraphs such that when the reader is reading, you are leading the reader to the next paragraph. So I think this is all that I wanted to tell you guys about how to write a research paper. Of course, this video is too short to give all this kind of information, but I just wanted to give you an overview so that you could get started and write good research papers of your own. Thank you.